G'day guys, you're back with MiracleMAX. Today our job is looking at a Nissan Pathfinder 2007 model with the airbag light on. What's wrong with it? Let's check it out. Have to agree that ever since the worldwide recall of Takata airbags, there's been a lot of people panicking about whether they will go off or not go off, whether they will kill you or save you. So really it is important that we find out if the airbag system is working and what is going to create the airbag light coming on. There appears to be some sort of discrepancy about whether the airbag system will work or not work if the airbag light is on. From what I've been told, the airbag system will not work if that airbag light is on. Also keep in mind that in some states here in Australia, you will not be able to register your car if the airbag light is on. So it's really important that we make sure that we get this fix done and the vehicle out of here. In this particular case, the customer has said they just drove in their driveway and all of a sudden the airbag light started to flash. It wasn't involved in an accident or anything like that. So best thing we can do is hook up the scan tool and see what the code is for starters. We'll like our bells and whistles on our later model cars, but it all comes at a price. Just notice when I turn on the ignition, this has a programmed key to suit each individual owner of that particular key. So when I hook up my scan tool and go to turn on my ignition, just notice what happens. Okay, so the seat will self-adjust. You think, well, that's fantastic. But one of the problems that even these suffer from is the wiring underneath the seat itself. Now this can be, there can be some airbag related wiring under there, or it could be the power seat itself. I'm not quite sure in this particular model. Just be aware in some cases that the wiring underneath the seat can be at fault at times. Just entering in Nissan, so we're going to international, 16 pin. And I have done previous checks on it, so we're just going to go to airbag and we have to do our 1, 2, 3, 4 so that we know what the hell we're doing. I hope I do. Diagnostic trouble codes, entering on that, and the codes that we have here is a B1049 and it all relates to the same one. We've got a present and a history. Record, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe I've attempted to record it and didn't realise it, but it's a present as well as a history. So driver's airbag module, they now have dedicated sites to let you know whether your driver's airbag needs to be replaced or not. This one in particular is called ismyairbagsafe.com.au. So all you do is you pop in your rego number here and it'll tell you if it is affected or not. And as you can see, this particular vehicle is not affected by the recall. So it's not a faulty airbag that needs to be replaced as regard to a recall, that is. Still could be a faulty airbag. What's next? Let's have a look at the airbag itself. Just a heads up with regard to safety, guys. I've pulled off the steering column shroud, and airbag, anything airbag related, has always got a yellow connector or yellow cabling or whatever the case may be. Now, before you work on anything airbag related, you should always either disconnect the battery for 3 minutes, Nissan say, or pull out an airbag fuse or anything like that, fusible link in particular, before you do anything airbag related. So at this point in time, I just wanted to have a physical look at the connector here. This goes into our clock spring connector, which in turn comes up to our airbag. But I'll pull this apart shortly and we'll do some more testing. Remember, it says it has an open. At the moment, I've got a wiring diagram up for the Nissan Pathfinder. And what we're looking at here is our driver's airbag. If we hover over that, that should tell us airbag assembly, steering wheel. So that's the one that we're looking at. This fella here, of course, is here it's called an airbag spiral cable. We all know it as a clock spring. Basically it's wiring that is wound around. We need to keep that central if ever we pull that out. The wiring going onto it appears to be yellow and grey, so we'll have a look at that shortly. It's a good idea to check the connections back here at our SRS module, and that way we can determine if it's a clock spring problem or if it's an airbag problem. After a bit of searching, the airbag module can be found inside the centre console. Still got a bit of digging to get it out, of course, but that's the little fella there. And I'll do my testing at that particular point. The airbag fuse is located in behind the glove box there, and there's another panel that gets pulled down. This little fella here that sits in there, and that's got our details, a little decal on the back there, and it's the airbag one is the second one down, and as you can see I've already pulled that one out. So I'm going to go and have some lunch now anyway. That'll drain all the capacitors. I've pulled the key out, stuck it on my bench, so we shouldn't have any issues. So after lunch now, I've let the capacitors drain away. I've had a bit of a scratch of the MiracleMAX brain, and I thought to myself, well, look, that ECU's got security screws on it, and I'd have to remove this, that and everything else to get to it. So what I'm actually going to do, you can see them tucked away there. Some of the screws are up in behind this panel here. Where am I? In behind here. So a little bit difficult to access. So generally speaking, I'd check it at the ECU there. But today, because it says it's got an open, I'm just going to check it from here. Like I said, two wires come in here, clock spring into the airbag itself. So if I check it back here and there's an open, maybe the clock spring, maybe the airbag. We'll check that next. As you can see, I've pulled off the connector going to the clock spring, and I've just replaced it with a couple of wires going in. It's just two wires. That comes down to my multimeter. At the moment I'm reading 14.2 ohms. That's quite high. Generally an airbag or a squib will have around about 3 ohm from the research that I've done so far. So 14 certainly is excessive. It may be enough to trigger the SRS ECU into thinking that it's outside of parameters and has created an open. So is that at the airbag, or is it a bad connection going through our clock spring? That's next. I've had to scratch my brain a little bit to try and figure out how this airbag comes off, and in actual fact I turned to Dr. Google. Nothing wrong with that, always use the resources available. Now this fella's a little bit tricksy. Check this out. If we scroll around here, and I can zoom in for you, see that hole at the base? So you get yourself like a punch or something flattish on the end, and you stick it in, and there'll be a wire, and the airbag will pop up in theory. It has popped. It takes a little bit of jiggling to get out. I'll show you what it's like on inside when I get the thing out. So what happens when you push up with this punch that I used before to remove the airbag? If we have a close look down here, you can see there's a bit of wire that you push on, but if we scroll back you can see what's happening there. It actually releases the airbag by means of that metal frame. So you've got to, honestly I was surprised how hard, and someone said that you've got to push up there and then pull back, and it's a load of rubbish. All you've got to do is go through the hole and push up fairly hard, as you can see, and that will pop out the bottom section. Well, what they failed to tell you was that you have to continue to push up to get the top section out as well. So that's all you do. Just make sure you get pretty hefty and get the old max muscles working and push up on that, and the whole airbag can be released then. And to put it back in, all you got to do is pop him back into place. Okay, so airbag is right here. The horn button, which I've pulled off here, there's a bit of a button at the back of it that you've got to press. You can't just yank on it, you've got to press this little button, then it will come off. Of course there's my SRS airbag wiring. That's the two wires that go on there, and that was in fact clipped around this little connector here, or this little holding section here, so don't yank on it. That'll come around here so it's out of the road and clip back in. To release the airbag clip, you can see that little black connector, and you simply get a screwdriver and lift that up. At that point, in theory, well actually I better be careful while I'm filming, I don't want to drop the airbag while I'm trying to do everything single-handed, but that in turn will just lift up or slide back. I haven't pulled it off as yet, so I don't know. Then of course supporting the airbag, always hold the airbag away from yourself. So in this case I'm going to go hold it here in case it goes off. I'm not going to damage myself. Okay, so when we put it down on the ground, or when I put it on the bench, I'll put it this facing the bench in case it takes off. It doesn't want to spring off everywhere. Okay, so I'll get this off next, then we'll do further testing. This is the airbag off. As you can see, here's the two connectors. Now the interesting thing is that it has what's called a shorting bar. So when this is pulled off, there will be a little bar that shorts the two off to stop it actually accidentally going off. When I test this next, I'll have to push something down, something plastic, to pull those two pins apart. Therefore I can do testing of the airbag itself. What's the wiring like? So I've still got it connected as I did before with my two wires here, but of course I've got it open on my clock spring connector. And let's have a look. What is the multimeter going to say now? Of course, if it's got a shorting bar, it will read that it's got continuity all the way through it, but in this case it doesn't have a shorting bar, therefore it's reading OL. What's the resistance on our airbag though? Well, here's an interesting turn of events. As you can see, I've gone straight onto the airbag squib, pushing aside the connectors that I've used insulated, and they have pushed aside the shorting bar, which is great. I've got them connected, and what does our multimeter say in this case? Let's zoom in. I've only got about 2.3, 2.4, which is excellent, which is what it's meant to read. So where are we getting this 14 ohm resistance from? Is it through the clock spring? I suppose what I could do is short out the pins, just do a cross up here, so I could cross between here and here, and then check at the back of my clock spring with a multimeter, and if that's got 10 whatever ohms, then obviously there's a resistance fault there. You probably can't see it very well, but the two pins that I need to short or measure from is 1, 2, 3 from the right, so 1, 2, 3, it's as close to the side as possible, and the one directly below it. They are the squib wiring, and they're the ones that I'm going to measure from. They're the ones that I had my multimeter on before. My goal, of course, is to see if the clock spring has any problems, and to do that what I've done is just pull apart the connector that goes onto the squib, or the actual airbag that sits up here. And what I intend doing now is shorting those two terminals out. Don't, Max, you'll blow it up. No, just think about it, guys. This is not even connected here. Here's my airbag connector that goes back to my ECU, so there's no fear of doing anything. All I'm doing is checking for continuity through my clock spring connector. And of course, if I short these two out, then that takes this section out of the equation, and all I'm doing at that point is checking my airbag wire that goes onto the clock spring. So it may be a poor connection going onto the clock spring, I don't know. But let's see what our multimeter reads when I short these two connectors out here. So remember, our airbag was what, about 2 point something, should be about 3, something along those lines, so it was all good. Let's see what happens when we short out the clock spring. That's them shorted out. 8.5 ohms, that's quite a bit, isn't it? We need to check that connector going onto the clock spring next. Okay, as you can see, I've removed this connector here that goes onto here. Okay, and got that out the road. And you can also see that I've put some white texture on here and here. You can see the two lines line up. So make sure that that goes back exactly that way, because that keeps our steering wheel centralized. I'll pop off the steering wheel next. Of course, all this system is a wire coming from here, going in like an extension cord, then back out through here, and then the other one on this side goes through here, blah blah blah, out that side. So what I'm going to do now is just check one wire compared to here, and then the other wire compared to the other side, and see if there's one particular wire that has bad continuity. Sure, why not, Max? Give that a try. Okay, let's have a look at that on the multimeter. And that's reading about 0.6, 0.7 of an ohm, which is really, really good, because that's probably the length of my multimeter leads that's causing that. Let's change it over to the other side and see what that does. So I'm now going from that pin, get rid of that pin altogether so I don't get confused, stick it in there, and of course, when I go over to this wire, that should have the high resistance in it, I'd imagine. And there we have it. Look at that. Zoom in, Max, zoom in. There we go, there's our 7.5. So on this particular wire here, or this terminal here going in through the clock spring, has got high resistance. So what we have is, on this particular wire inside the clock spring, is got bad continuity somewhere. It goes in through here, blah blah blah, out here, and that's where we have our high resistance. The other side was fine. So it's just this end of it. Really, the clock spring needs to be replaced. Have a chat with the customer, see what they want to do. So after getting approval from the customer, it's come back a week later to have that part replaced. And of course, who doesn't like that new part smell? Wait a minute, I don't think so. Look, in my opinion, someone's been in this box already. Look how manky the box is, hey. And it wasn't, I haven't touched it, it wasn't taped down, the tape's been cut. And check it out inside. Have a look. Well, there's my clock spring, that's not an issue, that's fine, we'll put it to one side. Where's the wrapping? Wrapping's not even around it, is it? Look, I'm hoping that it's okay, but considering these things generally aren't a returnable item, it's quite possible that this was done in-house. Now, I'm not suggesting that it was done locally because they had to order the part in, but hey, look at that box, that's pretty manky. I hope everything's going to be okay. We'll stick it and see what happens. And of course, before I start my work on the airbag system, I've removed the fuse out of the fuse area for my airbag, just to make sure that the capacitors are drained just like last time. I can now confidently go ahead. About half an hour has passed so far, so I feel very sure that those capacitors would have drained away. I can work on the airbag system safely. As you can see, I'm pretty much back where I was last week. I've got the steering wheel off, the cowling, all that sort of gizmo. You can see the little tang that fits into this hole here. Just that little fella there, that clips into place. Then it's held in by those two screws here and over here. There we go. Alright, so of course this has got to come off. I've got to change over switches and bits and pieces and wiring, etc. Just one interesting thing with regard to the clock spring. Notice here on the new one, to stop it rotating, they've got a lock here. You can see in place it holds this pin. Once you pull that collar off, the base section will be free to rotate. So leave this piece until last. We don't want this rotating any way at all. Why is that? Well, how does a clock spring actually work? Clock spring is purely an extension cord. Here's an example of one I prepared earlier. All it is a ribbon cable, as you can see, and you can see that two little bars inside there are thicker than the others. These two here are designed for your airbag, whereas the others are designed for things like, you know, your audio system, cruise control, anything that's on the steering wheel. If we have a look inside the clock spring here, you can see that that's how it's mounted. That's why it needs to be mounted centrally, because if we go too far one way, we're actually going to rip that ribbon cable straight off its connector, and that's what some people do. So, that's a clock spring. Can't remember if I showed you guys last week, but I'll show you now. This particular connector, which goes to the clock spring, the yellow one over here, is actually held in place by this grey one. So you can't get the yellow one out until you get the grey one out. So this here has to be slid out like that. As you can see, it's holding the yellow one in place for some strange reason. Just something to be aware of when you're trying to put the thing to trying to pull this one out. It won't come out unless you get the grey one out. Bit of a pain, but it's a bit of a heads up, hey. So here's the old one, I've got it out. Here's the new one. As you can see, I've still got a bit to change over. If we put them close side by side, maybe, something like that. This cover has to come off, of course. That gets put over there. And of course we have our wipers and indicators and all sorts of arms that need to be changed over. But you can see these connectors on the new one have to be lined up over here to work with the circuitry on those switches there, the stalks, etc. So that'll be next. So I've pulled off the steering angle sensor with three little screws that get held in place, those fellas there. They just get located like that. So you just pull them out, 1, 2, 3, etc. And I thought to myself, steering angle sensor, we may have to do a reset on that when we get it all back together. I'll have to have a think about that and see what it does. Put that to one side. Now, as I was working through, I thought, well, these stalks here must get pulled off somehow. Generally speaking, they'd be screwed into place, etc. But looking at the new one, I couldn't see any screw holes around this area. But I did notice some little slidey bits in here. That was a bit of a clue. So if you have a close look here, you can see that there's a little lever there, and there's a little lever there. You push both of those together, it should pop out. Okay, make sure that you've got this connector apart. Same-o on this particular stalk as well. I'm all back together just where I was. It's all good. Made sure that all my connectors everywhere are put into place properly. They're located properly, and of course before I give it back to the customer, I'm going to test all the features that are associated with the stalks as well as on the steering wheel itself, which is you know, what have we got? Yeah, so we've got cruise control and all that sort of gizmo. Audio system. So I'll check all that before I give it back to the customer. What I wanted to show you now was the locking collar assembly that's been put onto our clock spring, and that's to stop the thing rotating. And as I mentioned, you know, it's going to rotate one way or the other and eventually tear the clock spring. Okay, so once I remove this pin here, or this little collar that goes over my wiring loom, it's not going to spin around or anything like that, as a lot of people assume. It's quite stiff either way. It's just a ribbon cable, as I mentioned, that holds it in place centrally. I haven't removed this at all, so this is straight out of the box, so I know that it hasn't spun. I'm just about to put my steering wheel straight back on, and this gets located through this pin here. Then I know that I've done it correctly. That's all I got to do. Pop my steering wheel on, locate this properly, hook up my squib, my airbag squib, put it all back together, test absolutely everything, check codes, all that sort of gizmo. Then she's ready to go back to the customer. Sweet as. I've got my steering wheel back in place, and you can see that that's where that locator goes, that little pin right up the top. I've pulled off my plastic connector that held it in place. I've lined up my steering wheel to get my angle correct again. So while I'll double check my steering angle sensor, make sure that everything's honky-dory, because I've put everything back into place, it probably won't be an issue. So all I've got to do now is hook up my connector here, and of course this one here goes onto my squib, onto my airbag, horn button over here, etc. Tighten it down, of course, don't forget that, Max. Don't want the steering wheel dropping off when you're driving along. Nah, that'd be a bit dopey, fella. Alright, steering wheel nut goes on, make sure that's schniz and tight. Probably 2 or 3 clicks on the elbow should tighten it sufficiently. And then we'll put it back together. Just to reinforce what I screwed up on last week, was making sure that the airbag faces in an upward direction, okay? You don't want to face it down the other way. Just have a think about it. If this airbag now goes off, what's it going to do? Well, it's going to take off like a bullet, isn't it? If we put it up this way, all it's going to do is deflate the airbag, if it's not a Takata and doesn't explode. But yeah, it'll just sit there nicely, and if there's any deployment or something goes wrong, then the airbag goes up here and doesn't take off like a rocket and head through the ceiling or somebody's face. So that's the safe way to store an airbag while you're working on the vehicle. Time to pop it back into place. Another thing too, when you put your airbag wire back on, make sure that little locking tab gets pushed into place, otherwise it won't. There we go. It just pushes into place. Don't forget that this wire has to go around this little hook assembly here that holds the wire out of place. That's the airbag wire, of course. And if you're confident that you've got all your wiring put into place, etc., and you're just about to push your airbag in, we just push up with my little punch that I did before, push down on that, and should locate. Click, 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 click. Job's done. And of course, don't forget to put your little airbag fuse back into place. You can get your fat fingers in there, Max. Bloke. Legend. And the little cover, etc, etc, etc. I've just cleared the codes of the airbag with the ye old G-scan. As you can see on the dash, there's no airbag light flashing at the moment. Take it for a road test. I've checked all my features, as in my indicators, wipers, all those sort of things, horn. When I go out in a road test, I'll check all my cruise control as well as my audio buttons and make sure that everything's okay, and hopefully we've got it sorted. Remember that record listing that came on with the airbag open fault code when we had it on the G-scan? Now that one is still there, believe it or not, but I've spoken to someone who's far smarter than I am, and he said it's mainly with the Nissans that he's seen it. Because it's an SRS system, and of course to do with safety, it will stay in memory for a given amount of key cycles. Once the ECU is satisfied that that fault code has been cleared, then that record figure will disappear. Next time the customer comes in for a service, I'll hook up the G-scan once again and make sure that that fault code with the record next to it is out of here. After clearing the fault code and taking it for a road test, I'm confident that we've got the thing sorted. No more airbag light is on. I've checked all my accessories, wipers, lights, cruise control, audio, all those sort of things, and they all work fine. Another thing I did was I turned from lock to lock. Now why did I do that? Well, don't forget the old clock spring is a piece of ribbon cable that only goes one way. So you have to have it central, and remember that's the big issue. So if it started going tight in one direction, you knew that old clock spring had let go. But no problems there, lock to lock, full right hand, full left hand, no issues. I'm happy with it. Airbag light is still off. Resistance in this particular case to the ECU means an open. Why is that? Well, it has parameters that it works in. It might say, well, 0 ohm up to, let's say, 4 ohm, including our squib, is okay. Anything over that, that's not good. We'll call it an open because it's now out of range, it's out of parameters. So in this particular case, that open has been cleared because of the old clock spring being replaced, and that resistance is still there. I've just checked it. It'll be good to show the students. Next week I'm teaching them diagnosis, so it'll be a good opportunity to show them a fault that still exists. The resistance is still there, I just checked it before. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, give it a like and comment down below. Of course, don't forget about that notification bell. You don't want to miss any future videos. So guys, until next time, this is MiracleMAX signing off. I'll catch you later.